good afternoon and welcome from Queen Anne's School, the music department here in Caversham, Berkshire. And it's wonderful to introduce Anita D'Attellis with us this afternoon. And this is a focus on Beethoven and two piano sonatas in particular, the Opus 31 number 3 and his penultimate sonata, the Opus 110 in A-flat major. And we're here to recognise Beethoven, 250, obviously born in 1770. So I'm going to talk a little about what one would expect in composition at this particular point, so therefore looking at characteristics associated with the classical period, moving into the romantic period. Beethoven was so pivotal in this, taking us from the classical period into the romantic period. And then Anita and myself are going to look at elements and compositional characteristics of the two sonatas and just demonstrate some of our findings through musical examples, and then of course leading to a complete performance of the two respective sonatas. So I do want to address the main characteristics of classical music, but before I do that, it's important that we emphasize two important sort of precursory movements. First of all, style galant, and this is a focus on grace, beauty and elegance, to a certain extent naivety, represented by composers such as C.P. Bach and Gluck. And this was fundamental in influencing the three main pivotal composers of the classical period, Haydn, Mozart and Beethoven. And we also need to think about Sternum Drang, the translation of storm and stress. Such compositions will be characterized by extreme contrasts in register and dynamics, instability of key, and exciting orchestral effects. And certainly what we're going to see this afternoon when we scrutinize these two sonatas are elements of style galant and elements of Sternum Drang. When we arrive at the classical period, we just need to think about some of these compositional characteristics, which again we will focus on in these two sonatas. So classical music has a lighter, clearer texture than Baroque music, and is less complex. It is mainly homophonic, melody above chordal accompaniment, but counterpoint by no means is forgotten, especially later in Beethoven's period. It also makes use of style galant, as we said, in the classical period, which is drawn in opposition to the strictures of the Baroque style, emphasizing light elegance in place of the Baroque's dignified seriousness and impressive grandeur. Variety and contrast within a piece became more pronounced than before. Variety of keys, melodies, rhythms and dynamics using crescendo, diminuendo and sforzando, along with frequent changes of mood and timbre, were more commonplace in the classical period than they had been in the Baroque. Melodies tended to be shorter than those of the Baroque music, with clear-cut phrases and clearly marked cadences. And certainly when we're analysing theme, phrase and motive in the classical period, we're encouraged to look at antecedent and consequent relationships, this wonderful sense of balance and proportion and symmetrical phrasing. And of course that is born out of style galant. The orchestra increased in size and range, the harpsichord continued fell out of use, and the woodwind became a self-contained section. As a solo instrument, the harpsichord was replaced by the piano or the forte piano, and early piano music was light in texture, often with Alberti bass accompaniment, but in later became richer, more sonorous and more powerful. Importance, of course, was given to instrumental music. The main kinds were sonata, trio, string quartet, symphony, concerto, serenade and divertimento. Sonata form developed and became the most important form. It was used to build up the first movement of most large-scale works, but also other movements and single pieces, such as overtures. And I will return to a more defined definition of sonata form in a moment. So those are the findings, those are the things we expect to hear when we're listening to a classical piece, and we'll certainly encounter that in the first sonata, the Opus 31 number 3. We then move into the Romantic period, and again, what do we expect from a romantic composition, certainly in the hands of Beethoven? So freedom of form and design, it was more personal and more emotional. The tonal framework certainly did extend, modulation to unrelated keys. We are really going to find that today, certainly in the Opus 110. There's some extraordinary modulations. An interesting tertiary modulation, so moving a major or minor third either side of the tonic, And one's only got to enjoy the work of Schubert and see him revel in that important relationship. The use of chromatic chords, chords like the Neapolitan sixth, the augmented sixth, the diminished seventh, the dominant minor and dominant major ninth, and of course enharmonic shifts and unorthodox resolutions. Again, we're going to see and hear this in abundance today, in particular with the penultimate sonata, the Opus 110. Song-like melodies and themes are long and lyrical, and they certainly contain chromatic harmonies and discords. We will encounter large intervallic leaps for expressive purposes in the melodic construction in Romantic music. Of course, dramatic contrasts of dynamics and pitch. If we're thinking about orchestral music, of course, the orchestra is growing in size, the instruments are becoming far more diverse. We have the valve system in the brass section, so great scope for developing the orchestral writing in this particular period of time. Of course, what we do see is the development of program music, music which has a narrative, music which tells a story. And shape was brought to work through the use of recurring themes in the hands of people like Berlioz, Liszt and Wagner. So Berlioz would focus on the idée fixe, the fixed idea, where a melody would not just penetrate the first movement of the work, but the entire particular composition. One's only got to think about Symphonie Fantastique, how that idée fixe dominates the 5 movements, and the way that theme is transformed and fragmented. A similar technique with Liszt, a thematic metamorphosis, where themes again are transformed and developed. And I suppose we see the same with Wagner in his operas or music dramas through the Lied motive, where a particular melody is associated to a character within the opera or a moment of symbolism. And of course, what we do expect and see in the 19th century is the importance of nationalism. Those comments are quite general, but it places things in context. What do you expect from a classical composition? What do you expect from a romantic composition? Well, the whole purpose really of analysis is about listening, and I'm very, very passionate about devising listening strategies. And what do we expect? What kind of work do we have to do as listeners and analysts? We need to focus on the importance of musical structure, how the work is shaped. We need to think about tonality and harmony. We have to explore the different keys, the modulations, scrutinize the chords. Think about texture. Think about melodic and thematic development. And again, Beethoven was a sheer genius of working through themes, again, which we're going to see through several examples. The importance of sonority, how sounds are combined, therefore timbre, tempo and rhythm, the importance of dynamics, of course, instrumentation, and the overall mood. I made reference to the importance of sonata form. So sonata form dominates the first movement and to a large extent the last movement of genres such as the symphony, the string quartet, the concerto and the sonata. And it was such an important structural device in this particular period. And it consists of 3 broad sections: an exposition, development and recapitulation. Your exposition will contain a first subject. You'll have a transition, and the purpose of the transition is to take you from one key to another in preparation for the second subject. So the second subject is placed in a related key. The exposition will close with a coda, and good performance practice tells you that the exposition should be repeated. You then move into the development section where the themes are worked out, and again, this is such an important aspect of Beethoven's writing, that he's able to transform and work through these particular themes and place through different keys. And then we arrive at the recapitulation, which is a repetition of the exposition. But of course, the second subject would always be placed in the tonic key because, of course, you are moving towards the close of the actual movement. So in the sonata form is such an important structural device in the classical and romantic periods, and we'll see that in operation later today. So we move on to Beethoven, and we tend to find that his compositional life is divided into 3 style periods. The first focuses on those very early works where he's highly dependent on the classical tradition and elements of Stylgalant and Sturm-Drang, and that's why I wanted to emphasize the importance of those 2 precursory movements and then some of the features associated with the classical period. We then move to the second style period, and this obviously we see a lot of progression. He wrote the symphonies 3 to 8, the Eroica to the penultimate symphony, so a lot of development happening in this second style period. And then we move to the final style period, the third period, and one of the great characteristics in Beethoven's third style period, the late works, is his deliberate working out of themes and motives to the utmost of their potential. And it's such an important feature. If I can just make reference to the second movement of his Ninth Symphony, which is a scherzo. It's placed as the second movement, and there's just a wonderful, relentless repetition of the theme. It's George Grove who said, "A miracle of repetition without monotony." And it is just a fantastic example of Beethoven having the ability to work through these thematic strands. This later style as well is symbolised by the increased extent and importance of contrapuntal textures, and in particular fugue, and there is a tremendous example in the final movement of the Opus 110. Of course, we are dealing with the genre of the sonata, and this again a very important genre of the classical and romantic period, usually in 3 movements, fast, slow, fast, and either for keyboard or a solo melodic instrument with keyboard accompaniment. And of course what we will see, that basic pattern being almost violated by Beethoven. So there's some context for you historically. We're now going to move into the first of our piano sonatas, the Hunt as it's called, Opus 33 number 3. So Beethoven composed this piano sonata in 1802 during his second style period. This was the third of a group of piano sonatas with which Beethoven took another larger step forward in a genre he ultimately revolutionized. The sonata, known as the Hunt, is Beethoven's most bright and cheerful piano sonata. It is notable that this sonata, with the exception of Opus 106, is the last of the piano sonatas to contain 4 movements, and it is the last one to include a formal minuet. Moreover, in all the 4 movements, not one of them goes at a slow tempo. The absence of a slow tempo helps to emphasize the light but deeply happy mood of the whole sonata. These 4 movements are allegro, scherzo, minuet, and presto. So some of the features then of movement 1. So the movement is placed in sonata form and begins with a wonderful 3-note motivic pattern, which does demand the listener's attention. The motivic pattern is harmonically supported by the chord of an added 6, A flat, C, E flat, and F. And this pattern moves through diminished 7th harmony and rests on an E flat major chord in second inversion. It is an incredible statement, and just listen to the power and the effect of that opening chord, the added 6. Thank you, Anita. The motivic pattern is then repeated and elaborated and supported by a tonic pedal, taking us to the transition at bar 33 with the repetition again of this very pattern in the tonic minor. Thank you, Anita. The lyrical second subject commences at bar 46, and again this is a hallmark of Beethoven's writing, the intention that the second subject has great lyrical qualities, and we certainly do get this. Of course, it's placed in a related key, the dominant, and the right-hand melody is of course supported by an Alberti bass left-hand figure. So again, those important characteristics of style galant early classical music coming through in the early stages of this first movement. Thank you, Anita. We then move into the development section, and it is highly compressed, and consider how the opening 3-note pattern is transformed and manipulated. Thank you. And of course this leads now, you getting a feel for how sonata form actually functions. This leads to the recapitulation, which sees the infamous pattern being supported by an F minor chord in first inversion. So Beethoven changes the harmonic support of that motivic pattern, and the movement closes with the coda, and as one would expect, focuses on the final references of this wonderful, characteristic opening theme. Thank you.
So I'll just do the end of the development section where we have this amazing first inversion chord repeated, and as if Beethoven doesn't know how quite to get to the recapitulation. It's rather unusual. And now the coda.
We then move into the second movement. Again, our expectation in sonata genre structure is that this would be a slow lyrical movement, but it's not. The second movement is an unorthodox scherzo marked allegretto vivace. It is unorthodox because it lacks a trio section. It features substantial thematic development. It's in 2/4 instead of triple time, and is placed into a sonata form structure. So there we are. We talked about Beethoven revolutionizing this important genre. There's some very, very firm evidence of Beethoven doing exactly that. Movement 3 is a charming movement which has features of the style galant, grace, beauty, and elegance. The movement forms great contrast to the rather modern scherzo. So we're just going to listen to the opening of the minuet and then listen to the opening of the trio. Thank you. Thank you so much. And then the last movement. Do remember that this sonata is placed in 4 movements. So the last movement is in sonata form, and the opening features a descending melody with a wonderful left-hand accompaniment. Another theme, likened to a horn call, follows this theme, is repeated and transformed throughout the movement. Again, this sort of excessive transformation and repetition of these wonderful themes. Thank you. Beethoven certainly explores tonality in the development section by modulating to G flat major, creating a tertiary relationship with the tonic E flat major. And there is a brief section in C flat minor written as B minor. Thank you. So again, you can see that the sort of kind of fusion, the play of Stargaland features, that opening theme, and then the rather abrasive writing there, placed in C flat minor, written in B minor, very, very distant from E flat, lots of storm and stress there. And that's why I wanted to make reference to the importance of Stargaland and Sturm Drang. We're going to listen to a performance in a moment of the complete sonata. So moving on then to the 31st Sonata, A-flat major, Opus 110. The autograph score of Opus 110 is dated 25th of December 1821, but it's unclear whether it was begun or completed that day. Like the previous sonata, the E major, Opus 109, the first 2 movements are quite short and of limited emotional range, while the third, lengthy and complex, with several contrasting sections. The opening theme in movement 1 is marked with amiability. The whole movement is gentle and moderately placed. The movement is naturally in sonata form, but the thematic material is so compressed in the development section. But what we're going to do is just listen to the opening of the actual movement. Thank you. Thank you so much, Anita. Again, Beethoven does explore tonality in this movement. There is a brief section, F flat major, written as E major in the recapitulation. So really, Beethoven is very much exploring tonality in this particular sonata. We then move into the second movement, which is a very stormy movement and is placed in the key of F minor. And again, Sternum Drang qualities. Beethoven focuses on structural ambiguity. The movement is a scherzo in the time signature of 2/4. Listen out for the symmetrical qualities in the opening theme, bars 1 to 4 antecedent and bars 5 to 8 consequent. Thank you. And then we move into the trio section, and again, this is placed in the key of D flat major, so a tertiary modulation from the actual key of the movement. So we're just going to listen to the opening of the trio. Thank you. Then we come to the final movement, the third movement, which we said at the beginning is very, very complex and very, very detailed. So the movement starts with a modulating introduction with a recitative. The movement starts in the key of B flat minor. The recitative starts on a dominant seventh of E major. And this section then gives way to a lamenting song in A flat minor. Just listen to the extraordinary opening of this final movement. Thank you. It is an extraordinary opening. And then the final section of the movement is fugal. So fugue is a contrapuntal device. And the most extraordinary subject in the home key of A flat major. And here's the fugue. Thank you. And we said that, of course, contrapuntal activity was such an important aspect of Beethoven's final compositional period. And here we have a wonderful display of fugal writing. And that fugal subject is developed and transformed by inversion in G major and incorporating rhythmic augmentation and diminution. So an amazing transformation and reworking of that fugal subject, undoubtedly indebted to J.S. Bach, and it is just a stunning example of fugal writing. Anita, I think you wanted to say a little more about this amazing fugue.
Yes, so when we return to the fugue in the final movement and it's in its inversion, I'll play those examples first, as you'll hear the alto part, then the soprano part, and then the bass part coming in. So I'll just play the inversion of the fugal subject. About that particularly, but then just within a few bars, he's sort of trying to get into C minor, and really everything becomes a bit more complex and a bit more chaotic. Imagine that Beethoven continued with the fugal subject and played this. Or maybe even this. Again, that wouldn't be too unusual, but actually what he does, he makes all the note values a lot shorter, so it's faster. And then he sort of overlaps those two voice parts in this way. And not only content with that, he then puts on the top another layer. He puts on the fugal subject. Going to put it on B natural. He puts the fugal subject on the top, but now augments or makes longer all the note values. So I'll try and bring that out while all the other parts are going on underneath. It's just amazing. Every time I play it, I think...
Genius. And it's all those wonderful things all contained sort of simultaneously. You have the fuse subject, you have stretta, you have augmentation and diminution. It's just an extraordinary example. It really is.
And quite complicated to play.
I'm sure. Thank you very much indeed, Anita. Thank you.